12 minutes past the hour of 7 o'clock this morning. We continue the conversation on the Now, and we look at the dangers of cosmetic procedures on animals. While some procedures are medically necessary, owners need to be wary about how aesthetic procedures may affect the welfare of their beloved pets. Joining us this morning for this conversation is Dr. Paul Crooks, President of the Trinidad and Tobago Veterinary Services and founder of the Tobago Animal Hospital. Good morning, Dr. Crooks.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. Immediately going into this conversation, one of the first things that comes to mind is something that used to be the norm, but I'm not sure if it is anymore, which is the docking of tails. Can you share a little bit with us about that? I know some people would have said that it was at one point in time a preventative measure. Is that the case?
So it was never a preventive measure. I know that was also said about the cropping of ears, which we'll get to, because people who argue that it was a preventive measure might have been thinking, I guess a dog that wags its tail might get it injured somehow on a fence or glass, maybe, I'm not sure. Because we all know of dogs who have full-length tails, who live happy, healthy lives with them. So as far as a tail being a tail removal or tail docking being a preventive surgery, that's not the case. In fact, generally tail docking was used for the Doberman and the Rottweiler breeds. Why was it used for those breeds in particular? Because the idea with breeds of dogs, once you're talking registered breeds, they're supposed to be genetically very similar. Of course, there are still genetic variations even within the purebred lines, which is why you can have a Westminster Dog Show or Royal Kennel Club show, because even within purebred Pomeranians, you have variations, and the judges look for and aware of these variations, as well as what the normal dog should look like, or what the normal features of a Pomeranian, a Rottweiler, or Doberman should be. So Rottweilers and Dobermans in particular would sometimes be born with short tails. Others are born with their full tails. And in order to ensure uniformity, so that at a show, when the animals are being compared, it would be impossible to tell for a judge if the tail was short at birth or if it was cut at birth. And actually, that idea of cutting the tail to ensure uniformity across the breed, that's long been dispelled as something that is necessary for the judging of an animal. So you'll see at a Westminster Kennel Club show, a Rottweiler or a Doberman prancing around the arena with a very long, fine tail. And the truth is that cosmetic surgery on the whole has been generally seen now as something that is unnecessary and maybe even cruel to do. Depending on which country you work, it may be against the law to perform any cosmetic surgeries at all.
I think maybe one day that's a conversation we can visit when it comes to laws in Trinidad and Tobago specifically, and our animals as well. But keeping to the conversation this morning when it comes to cosmetic procedures, share with us exactly the procedure of declawing animals and why people would even think of doing something like that, to be quite honest.
All right. So declawing could mean multiple things to different people. So in dogs, you have the occasion where where the thumb would be, if you look at the paw of a dog and you run your eyes up the leg, there may be a little appendage with a nail hanging back. Sometimes there are one or two of them, depending on the dog. And that may actually cause an issue. Sometimes when an animal is digging, sometimes an animal may put its paw or its leg through a hole in a fence, and that part with the extra nail gets hooked and pulls and yanks and bleeds, and all sorts of things happen. So veterinarians may opt to remove that extra appendage, not necessarily cosmetically, not because of appearance, but generally because it may cause injury in the use of the leg, the normal use of a leg that the dog would every day while playing or interacting with the environment may end up hurting itself. So sometimes they do that. But generally, this declawing that we're talking about is a cosmetic procedure because it's an owner who comes in and says, my cat is a nightmare. My cat has been tearing at the curtains and damaging my mats and pulling at my furniture, and I want to remove the claws from my cat so that my cat can no longer damage the environment. Now, as an owner, there are what we call 5 freedoms that every animal should display, right? But one of them, and the most important one in this regard, is the freedom to express normal behavior. It is normal for a cat to scratch. And therefore, we recommend that an owner provide an environment or scenario that allows the cat to scratch in a controlled, safe way. So usually cats will have a scratching post. Many of us have cats that just roam and they would go outside and scratch in the environment. They'll find trees, tree barks, and so on and scratch, and your house would be safe. But if you are an apartment dwelling or house dwelling person with indoor cats, you must provide a scratching post for them so that these cats can have a relatively normal experience as a cat. So we don't ever recommend declawing because declawing is more about your inability to control the environment for the cat, which actually should be your responsibility, not the removal of the claws.
Speaking about inability to control, the next topic that I saw listed definitely piqued my interest, which is the de-barking of dogs. Why would this be a consideration?
Unfortunately, again, it's this idea of this is too much for me as an owner to handle. You have a dog will bark. And usually a dog barks for good reason. Of course, every owner will tell you there are times where the dog barks and they can't explain why the dog is barking, or it's the neighbor that they see every day. But at the same time, the barking is a normal dog behavior. So just the idea of removing the ability to bark from an animal, which is again a surgical procedure where you remove parts of the vocal system so that the animal can't vocalize in the way that it normally would. Just the idea of removing those parts so that you as the owner can have some, I guess, a quieter environment, then why did you even take dogs in the first place? So again, like we're approaching Christmas, and I always advise owners of this. When you get a puppy at Christmas time, you are not taking a puppy home. You are taking a whole being, a live animal that is going to be alive for years to come. So it is not going to remain a puppy. Not only that, but puppies display puppy behaviors. They're going to bark, they're going to bite things, they're going to pee everywhere. And you have to be ready for that, as well as be ready to train them so that they go towards the way you want them to go. You do not take a puppy and come back and return it to the owner or return it to the shelter, heaven forbid, in 3 months' time because you say, look, this puppy is too much for me. No, you took a puppy. This is what a puppy entails. And then the puppy grows into a dog, and care for a dog entails X, Y, or Z. You need to have the budget for that. Owning an animal is a privilege, not a right, which means you should be able to care for this animal in the appropriate way if you decide to keep it. So as far as debarking, it is part of a normal dog's behavior to be able to bark and interact with the environment in that way, especially if you have a group of dogs, which means you as the owner should be aware of that and prepared for that rather than trying to fix the dog after the fact.
You know, one of the things that also really struck me with that conversation particularly is dogs, obviously, they bark to communicate as well. They make sounds to communicate. So even just removing that is, if your dog is in pain, if something is wrong, even if there's something that you can't physically see, that's the way your dog communicates. And it's so unfortunate that this is a procedure that some people do request as well. As a vet, if somebody comes and requests that, does the vet have the right to refuse to do the procedure?
Yes. So in Trinidad and Tobago, the majority of vets do refuse surgical procedures, now cosmetic procedures. So now I have to preface that by saying that there are a handful of vets who still do cosmetic procedures. And one vet in particular has taken the stance that there are many non-vets who are practicing. And this is, of course, a different topic and one we would have spoken about before. But we have many vet impersonators who are performing surgeries, frauds, quacks, whatever you want to call them, definitely breaking the law. But of course, we have to get evidence and there's a whole procedure there. But we have many persons who are not registered to practice veterinary medicine who have been performing surgical procedures. And you have many persons in Trinidad and Tobago who are very aware of who these people are and still call them because, listen, the vet isn't going to cut my dog's tail. So could you come by and just cut the tail for me? Or the vet, seriously, it seriously happens. The vet isn't going to crop my dog's ear. So could you please come by and just cut the dog's ear? Of course, we don't even have to talk about all the risks involved. Just use your imagination. But at the same time, this is why some vets have taken the stance to say, look, I will do it in a safe environment if the owner absolutely insists, instead of putting the dog at risk. But that said, most vets, nearly all vets refuse. And it would be our push as the Trinidad and Tobago Vet Association that legislation does come out strongly condemning cosmetic surgeries and cosmetic procedures in animals, and that it becomes a criminal act in Trinidad and Tobago.
Again, something that we definitely do have to have a conversation about. We just have shy of 2 minutes, but there are two things that we need to touch on, which would be the hair dyeing and, funnily enough, liposuction. With hair dyeing, we've seen recently, especially on social media, people are changing their dogs into cartoon characters, into unicorns, into lions, and so much more. What is your stance on that?
Hair dyeing may be safe. Remember that a dog, and especially a cat, are fastidious cleaners. They lick themselves. So where we will not take toxins into our body by licking after changing our hair color, a dog or a cat may do so. So you must ensure that a dye that is used is safe, is non-toxic for pets. One. Two, you may also use a certified groomer, of which there are a few in Trinidad and Tobago, in order to ensure that the dyeing is done appropriately and safely. Generally, I would say it's not something that you should consider doing at home, but it can be done safely.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned not being done at home because, of course, many times we do see things on social media and before you know it, everybody is trying something different as well. So the recommendation of going to a groomer, going back also to that sense of privilege when it comes to having an animal and not a right. Now, let's speak about liposuction. It's not necessarily something you think when you think of a dog or a cat or any kind of pet. So what areas bring this into consideration?
Well, again, every owner should have a close relationship with a veterinarian. There are ways to manage a dog's diet if a dog is becoming obese. And we do still, in Trinidad and Tobago now, have apartment dwelling dogs and house dwelling dogs that are not exercised, that are overfed, and so on. It happens quite a bit. And of course, in dogs and cats, we have things like diabetes and hypertension that can occur similarly. So there are lifestyle diseases. So there are reasons to control the weight of an animal. But at the same time, liposuction is usually not the way we'd go about it. Again, because that's more about appearance, but isn't addressing the underlying issue. If the issue is that the animal is overfed or not well exercised, that's what you need to address.
Okay. Understood. Just moving away from cosmetic procedures for a moment and going to regular vet visits, how many times a year would you recommend somebody brings their loved ones in, their pets in, sorry?
So I recommend that your animal goes to the vet as often as your vet recommends, which may be up to every 3 months. But some vets recommend only annual visits. If you as an owner are diligent and you deworm your animal regularly and you do your Bravecto or your NexGard for fleas, ticks, you have them well under control, then that animal only really needs to come into the vet, usually once a year, maybe for blood tests, but definitely for vaccines.
Okay, and well, final question for you. When it comes to cosmetic procedures, particularly, aside from, of course, being a registered vet, are there any certifications that people should look out for, especially when it comes to things, let's say, like aesthetically hair dyeing, that sort of thing? Are they registered with your association? Anything we should look for?
No, unfortunately, groomers and other veterinary paraprofessionals are not registered with the association at this time, nor is there any standard that they have to meet in order to achieve that recognition. So our recommendation generally is to speak to your vet for your vet to recommend someone for you. Because usually if the vet makes that recommendation, that person is certified or qualified enough to be able to perform that procedure.
Okay, well, Dr. Crooks, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we can have a conversation soon about legislation and pets in Trinidad and Tobago.
I hope so too.
Have a great day. Dr. Paul Crooks, President of the Trinidad and Tobago Veterinary Services, founder of the Tobago Animal Hospital, speaking to us this morning about cosmetic procedures for animals. Stay tuned, there's more coming up on this edition of Tobago Thursdays after the break.